So today we're working on an iPad Air black, which is going to be replacing the digitizer. For this repair, highly recommend some kind of gloves. We'll need a screwdriver, some alcohol, cards to help separate the adhesive, and then something to disconnect the flex cables, and a source of heat. We're going to be using a heat gun for this. It is a pretty quick process. We're just going to start by gently heating the edges up without putting too much heat on the LCD itself. We're going to try to find the least broken section to start so we can get a good entry point, and then after that we'll go around with these parts, separate the adhesive from the digitizer into place. If we run into too much resistance, we do have 99% isopropyl alcohol. That will help soften up that adhesive as well. We're looking for it to just be slightly warm to the touch. And then we're going to grab our tool to actually get in. We're going to make sure that we're between the frame and the actual glass, and away from where the cables are, especially the home button cable, because we'll need to preserve that. Those cables are right around here. Now that we got initial entry, we're going to grab alcohol, get a little bit in there, and then we'll start going around with our cards. This particular unit is actually, the digitizer is damaged bad enough that it's going to be very difficult for us to separate it completely. As you can see here, we ended up just following a crack, and here as well. We want to be careful on this right edge, because this is where the cables are. top, left, and bottom side free. Going to go ahead, pull our cards, lift over the right hand side just like a book. That way we don't have to get anywhere near these cables here, here, and here. I was going to rest this slightly so as we do not have too much pressure put on that home button. Next step is to grab our Phillips. I'm going to take out these 4 corner screws. And if necessary, remove some more glass from the frame so we can get to the other 2. Sure that we do not put pressure on the LCD screen itself. We want to avoid cameras that are along this top edge. Okay, so unfortunately our digitizer broke a little bit closer than I would like to this LCD. We're going to go ahead and we're going to try to peel up a little bit just so we can make sure when we lift this LCD it's nice and clear. It's going to result in a lot of glass shards and sticky gloves. Okay, so now we're going to want to lift this LCD up this way. So, one of the easiest ways I have found to do that is to get your spudger just underneath at the top. Just gently lift. Just keep in mind that you don't want this to flex too much. If you have something in the way, it's best to move it out of the way before you continue. If necessary, you can always just put a card underneath. Help you continue to get across. Ever need a free hand again, just stick your card underneath. There we go, our LCD is free. Now we're going to gently lift it up because we will need to get to the connections underneath so we can safely disconnect the battery. That is the battery connection right there. We're going to want to make sure to keep this screw separate as it is a different link than these other 2 that we need to get here so we can disconnect the LCD and the old digitizer. And just like with any other Apple product, you're going to want to make sure to disconnect the battery before you disconnect the display, which can cause the backlight to burn out because it is integrated. So you just need to either use what's called a battery stopper, or in this case, we're going to just go ahead and just lift until it's separate. Alright, partner just double checked to make sure he just hit the power button to make sure that our LCD in fact did not turn back on, so we know that our power is disconnected. And the 3 screws on that bottom plate. Go ahead and lift that plate up. And with it will come the connection for the LCD. We're going to move that off to the side, place it somewhere safe so it doesn't get scratched. And we're going to go ahead and disconnect the digitizer and then the home button connections. After that, we'll have basically just the frame, which we'll go ahead and clean up at that point. digitizer has been safely removed. We're going to keep that because we'll need to take the home button off of it. But at this point, we need to go ahead and clean up the remaining glass and the edge outside of this edge, get any adhesive off so we can safely place the new one on. Okay, so it looks like we have basically everything off. We're going to take this down to the station where we can brush it off real quick, and then we will bring it right back. Okay, now that we have gone and brushed it off, you should have something that looks like this. It's very important that we get the bezel clean with nothing left on it. That way when we set the new one on, we're actually nice and flush. We also went ahead and removed a lot of the residue. You don't need to get it perfectly clean, but you definitely don't want any glass shards or things like that on it. We are currently done with this. Now that it is clean, we're going to go ahead and set it off to the side. And the next thing we're going to do is work on getting our home button off of our previous screen. If you have a device that has something like Touch ID, then you'll want to retain your same home button from your previous screen, as it is tied to the actual iPad itself. We're going to use our isopropyl alcohol to soften the residue, and we're going to carefully lift this up. It's not the end of the world if you do damage it. You just will be unable, you'll have to get a replacement, and you won't have Touch ID on that iPad anymore. Okay, so as you can tell, this button is actually separate from this frame. That's because this particular model does not have Touch ID. If it did have Touch ID, there would actually be a cable that ran from this cable to this button. So you'd want to be careful when removing it to make sure that you don't actually damage it. You also, if possible, would like to be able to transfer the gasket that's around the home button. This will make sure that it actually properly seats. Now that we're done with this, we're going to set it off to the side, move on to the LCD, and make sure that it is clean and usable. So we're going to make sure that we're always wearing gloves when we're handling the LCD, so we don't transfer fingerprints onto it, because they can be a little bit of a pain to clean. You can't really use any solvent or cleaner on them, because you can remove the slight film that's used to protect it. Now, in this case, we did manage to get some glass that actually landed on the screen. It's very important that we lift stuff straight up so as to not actually damage or scratch it. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to gently dab to remove a lot of the other larger pieces, and then we're going to finish cleaning this off. And there we go, our LCD is reasonably clean. Once when we get it seated, we'll make sure we get any other spots where we have a little bit of residue or something like that. But now it is time for us to start reassembling. So first thing we're going to need to assemble is we're going to need to replace the home button. So we're going to make sure that the flat bits are at the top and the bottom and reasonably square. And then we're going to go ahead and seat our home button in the same orientation that it was previously. So on these models where the home button is now separated to the bracket, you'll see two little holes. You'll want to make sure the pegs and button are lined up with those holes. And then your cable should run right along here. Can't quite secure it down yet, so we'll need to move this plastic out of the way slightly so we can get this directly seated onto that little copper pad. Alright, next we're going to need to adhere the actual digitizer cable to the glass itself. You'll see the two different ones. And any of them that have this blue little plastic strip you'll want to remove. After you have that pretty tricky bit of adhesive taken off, you're going to go ahead and lift this protective film one more time so you can properly seat this. It helps if you have a third hand to hold it. And your folding technique, you're just basically trying to go directly over at roughly 90 degrees. It should come up right up to the, almost right up to the edge, just like that. Now we don't have another piece of adhesive here, so we don't need to go ahead and do that one. So we'll go ahead and move this out of the way and relay down our protective film. And now we're ready to put this actually in the frame. With the frame seated down in the same orientation that you took it off at, we're going to go ahead and roughly lay this where it needs to go and then attach the cables back in place. You should feel a click when you do so. There we go. Now the digitizer is resecured, so we're going to rest this on something so I can have my hands free to work. We're going to go ahead and do the ZIF connector for the home button, making sure that that line lines back up and closing it. Going to put its little tape back on it just to make sure that it doesn't try to escape again. Now we're ready to reinstall the display, so we're going to grab our gloves again. And again, same orientation that it came off in. We're going to seat it on the bottom. Bring this cable back down and line it up. We may need to go slightly up higher so we have a little bit of room to do this. Now you're basically working blind on the ones that are adhered, but you should be able to line up screw holes and then click it down into place, just like that. Now we're going to go ahead and we will re-secure that bracket. As you can tell, this is a little bit of a juggling act. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and pull our battery shim out of the way. And grabbing that longer screw that we kept separate, we're going to go ahead and reattach battery pads to the logic board. And we're going to make sure without bending any cables yet, we're going to seat this back into place. And we're going to do a test power on. As you see, our logo comes up, so we know that we didn't damage anything during the repair. So we're going to go ahead and re-secure the LCD, give it one last little cleanup, then remove the adhesive, the protector from the adhesive and the protector for the digitizer, so we can secure this down. Screw management is very important because Apple likes to change the length of screws, even if it is the same, even if it's holding down the same part. Like in this particular example, these bottom and top screws are different. You do want to keep those separate as well. Now we're going to go ahead, finish buffing off this, remove the protective film and the adhesive, and we are ready to close this thing up. Very important to try to keep this as clean as possible, because anything you see on this screen right now, you'll be able to see later. Make sure you don't put too much pressure on it, because you can damage the LCD. It's very fragile the way it is right now. There we go. Now we're ready to seat this back down. So we're going to make sure, double check our home button is still in a good location, still held down. And we're going to close this just like a book or a laptop. We want to make sure that we are folding it and making sure that we're lined up with that edge as we close it. Make sure that our cables are in the correct orientation. We don't want them in between the adhesive and the frame. We want it to run alongside the frame. And double check, make sure you're all nice and flush. If in the case that you do have frame damage from the drop that damaged your digitizer, you're going to want to make sure that you either have it machined so it properly sits, and if there's any warp, you're going to want to make sure that you either replace the frame or have it machined as well. We're going to, one more time, double check, make sure that we actually can turn it on and our LCD is good. I don't see anything underneath that frame. Test that home button. And make sure that we have touch all the way around. And there we go. That's how you go ahead and repair an iPad Air. If you're interested in us doing any work for you, our website will be at the end of the card and will be in the about description below. Thanks again, and you guys have a wonderful day.